All right. So again, thank you everybody for coming to today's LA County Science Leaders Network and NGSS webinar. I just thought it'd probably be easier to share all of this information at one time rather than having to do this twice. But again, in the chat box are the resource links for whichever group you are part of, and some of you may be part of both of them. But again, we are doing a quick check in terms of what's going well so far. So feel free to continue doing that and putting that in the chat box. But let me go ahead and do some introductions. I'm Anthony Kwan. I'm your host. I'm the STEM Science Coordinator here with the LA County Office of Education. And you can see that these are the areas that I'm responsible for, including all of these student events that I'm involved with, which are actually happening now. So we had the LA County Antelope Valley Science Olympiad competition 2 weeks ago. We've got the Rio Hondo competition coming up this weekend. In about 2 weeks, we've got the LA County Science Fair. And then 2 weeks after that, we've got Engaging Girls in STEM. We got the City of STEM coming up in April, and just so many other things going on. Also helping me out here at LACOE, we've got Christy Pierce, who is also taking care of some of these student events for us as well. So she'll be joining me in some of these events and some of these ventures. Also joining us today, we've got our project director of our outdoor marine science field studies. So if you haven't gone to Wrightwood, you should probably think about that. If you haven't gone on the Floating Marine Lab, it is a fun experience. And if you have any other questions regarding ocean sciences, environmental ed, you can also contact Sean Hawk here as well. We also have our other STEM allies in the form of our instructional technology outreach in the form of Dr. Scott Moss, who helps us out every now and then, especially for those of you who are taking part in the Jump into CS series. So we're happy to have him help us out every now and then. We also have our CIS division support staff in the form of Maribel Garcia, so can't do all of this work without her. So as far as today, here's the agenda. Really, it's all about the dashboard news regarding science, and then we're going to go right into the announcements. Again, the resource links are in the chat that I put there for you. And if you haven't gotten it, there it is again. This includes the slide deck as well for you. But again, we are here to really talk about science dashboard news, and I invited Evan Bartelheim, our project director 3 of accountability and data literacy, to help explain what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself, and Evan, feel free to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Anthony. Anthony and I go so far back, and in fact, I probably first met him when I looked like this picture he just shared. I met him like more than 10 years ago when I was the director of instruction at Las Virgenes. So, but I'm happy to work with him now, and I was excited when he reached out because I love the opportunity to collaborate with Anthony. But we do have some great information around the dashboard, and that's my primary area of responsibility, supporting our LEAs with the dashboard and accountability measures as they connect to the LCAP also, and as well as how we collect the data and how we inform the dashboard, which includes CalPAD submissions and assessments and things like that, and how they inform the dashboard. So I thought I would jump in. I work with the CDE quite a bit with regards to dashboard type items, so we can talk a little bit about the most recent news and give you some context and some understanding of how the process will play out for getting science on the dashboard. So next slide, please. So what we did is we actually pulled some slides from, there's a group that meets, it's an advisory group for the CDE called the California Practitioners Advisory Group, and they weigh in on all things dashboard and accountability. And that it's one of several groups, advisory groups, and these can include technical advisory groups and indicator-specific groups, like the English Learner Progress Indicator has its own group. And so they presented just last week to the CPAG, as they call them, about this work, the work plan for this year, which includes adding science assessment results to the dashboard in a meaningful way. So go ahead to the next slide and we'll get into what they shared. So they shared a little background. Obviously, you were probably around, hopefully, when the first science test was administered to students of grades 5, 8, and high school. And then in 2020, the CD started discussing the possibility of adding the science test results to the dashboard. And then we had a pandemic. So everything was kind of scrapped for a while. But moving forward, we then go ahead and switch slides, please. In March of 2022, they revisited the possibility of the state board, when science results were available, how they could be incorporated into the dashboard, and utilizing those revised blueprints, right? They said they had already went back and revised them. And of course, then ELA and math also had shortened blueprints that became a component of that as well. Then at the September board meeting, there was a conversation around adding the link, which is now live. Next slide. And then they convened again in December, and they had that link first appeared on the dashboard. So they convened, so it appeared. Then that same link appeared again in this last dashboard. So that was as far as we got until, next slide, the announcement that the work plan, the science work plan, is actually the CDE has a accountability work plan, and in it are all the elements of the dashboard that are based on the state's ESSA plan. And so a lot of work goes into this. So, adding any individual indicator is not something that they can do lightly. So they have to actually get approval from the US Department of Ed. But now that they have access to 2 years of data from both the California Science Test and the California Alternate Assessment for Science, the CDE has announced they will work to develop options toward including these tests on the dashboard that will be published in December of this year. And just another note, the dashboard timeline is moving up over the next 3 years. So last year was December 15th, this year December 1st, then it moves to November, and then eventually we'll start getting it published on October 15th. So it's going to be closer to the beginning of the year, which will help drive that continuous improvement process earlier in the year, so we can make changes or make adjustments sooner. So the science work plan and everything they do is based on these dashboard principles that the CDE has, the state board has approved. They pulled out the 3 most important ones, but it's worth talking about. The priorities that are addressed here is this values high performance and growth equally, and that's what you see when you see the 5x5 colored grid. So you have a status, which is your 1 year's scores, and then the change, right? And that's where you get performance. So we're high performing, and we also give some credit for schools that are improving. So yeah, a little bit of both goes a long way, and that's how you can move up the 5x5 grid, is through both a continuous improvement where we have both a status and a change. Principle 8, that technical quality, so looking at measures that are valid, reliable, and that's part of what they need to do this year before they can for sure implement that, because there are a few new challenges that arise when you talk about implementing science. And then finally, principle 11, which I love, is the subject to continuous revision and improvement, just like they expect from all the districts and charter schools that that are adherent to the dashboard. The CDE itself acknowledges that the dashboard itself is constantly in a state of change. So adding a new indicator is an example of that, and that indicator may be revised and changed over time as well. So there's some key areas that the state board has to decide on. Just the announcement is not enough, and they have a lot of things they need to do. The next step, and Anthony dropped, I think, in the folder, is a March state board agenda item that talks about this work plan, and that will be like the first step. The state board will have to approve the idea that they're going to take up this work plan, and they'll talk about, it's an information item by and large, that they're going to be seeking guidance on a number of things, and they're going to lay all that out there. It's all kind of explained pretty nicely in the board item. But first of all, it's that they'll have to make multiple decisions: approving the metric to measure science assessment, approval of the status cut points, approval of the change cut points, approval of that 5x5 color scheme, inclusion of the indicator within the state accountability system through differentiated assistance. So using it as one of the criteria, how do we include it? Right now, to have the academic indicator as a factor for inclusion in differentiated assistance for a district, a district would have to have for any student group either both red, an ELA math, or a red and an orange. How will that work with science? And so they need to look at that. Would it be 2 reds and an orange? Would it be 1 red and 2 oranges? So that would be a factor. And then inclusion of the indicator within the federal accountability system for ESSA eligibility. And that's comprehensive support and improvement identification, and ATSI, additional targeted support and improvement. So the identification of schools for ESSA. So how that would work. So how we would factor that in. So a lot to consider. But I think the interesting stuff is first, adding that metric, right? So the technical evaluation, and this is what I find interesting about this process. They take all the data from those 2 years, which they have already, and then they run samples. Like, what would it look like? What's the distribution like? And can they look at things? Because the real tricky thing with the science assessment is it's not unlike ELA and math, which have that continuous scale score from 2,000 to 3,000 points that scales up from 3rd grade all the way to 11th. We have 3 separate assessments and they're not continuous, right? So they operate differently. And so they're going to have to look at it like as an individual school that, let's say, an elementary school that offers a 5th grade assessment. It may look perfectly normal, but when they start to use all 3 levels in an indicator where they're trying to balance distance from standard, they might find some stuff that's anomalous. So they need to make sure that everything's valid and reliable, and then factoring in the California alternate assessment. Factoring in alternate assessments can be somewhat challenging because they too have a different measure, and like the way they incorporate the California alternate assessments for ELA and math is, it's on a different scale. So how do we incorporate that? They use a proxy. It's called top of the scale, and they figure out whatever level a student tests into, they give it whatever the highest equivalent. So if they're a level 1 on the Cal Alt, they give them the highest possible score for level 1 on the regular assessment. They give them that number. So every student who's a 1 will get the same number essentially, because there's not an equivalent scale score way to transition that. So that's what needs to be first identified. They look at all those. Is it going to be reasonable? Will it come up with a number that we can trust to be valid and reliable? Next slide, please. 2 through 4, so identifying the status and the change cut scores, and then that 5x5 color grid. I find this interesting just because I never really understood it, and I was basically the accountability dashboard person. I was assessment, research, and evaluation, and I was never 100% sure. Well, it seemed kind of arbitrary, but what they do is they actually take all the results from across the state for both districts and charter schools, which are considered their own LEAs, and they look at the distribution, and that's how they make the determinations. And it's not based, and this is consistent for all the different indicators. They want to have, it's really used to identify schools for eligibility and for differentiated assistance support. That's the requirement, how the dashboard came about, primarily driven by ESSA. And so the best way to do it is to figure out, well, what would it look like? What are the top 10% and the bottom 10%? And then we determine what the cut scores for status would be. And then we say, well, what would change look like? And they look at the distribution of change, and they come up with a 5x5. And that's why sometimes you'll see on a 5x5 for an indicator that maintained, which is in the middle, may have a plus minus of 3%, let's say. And you're like, well, that's kind of weird. It seems like are you really maintained if you decline 3% on something? But it works because that's the distribution. Like if you're distributing things, it's a bell curve. So that's got to be taken up. And again, they'll look at all the results and they'll try to figure out what's a reasonable cut score. And what they try to avoid, and there are a couple different things that are worth noting. The 5x5 for the academic indicators right now is what's called a balanced 5x5. So there are only 2 colors per row. And the reason that that's used for academics, and they'll probably would look at the same thing for science, is because it helps avoid those wild fluctuations which can happen with the small student groups. And they realized a few years ago that was happening with small student groups. It can go up and down. And so that helps to kind of even things out, right? So they probably would pick that 5x5 would be my guess, to be consistent with the other academic metrics. So that's one of the things they'll take up. And so that was it.
Yeah. So Evan, the way that people should be thinking about this then, as far as the way I was told, and so please clarify, but year 1 is really just a baseball card version of the dashboard for science, correct? So it's just data and it's not going to necessarily have any huge impact, at least for year 1. Is that correct?
They're talking about for 2024. I think that may be right. But I think that the inclusion for 2024, the determination of the baseball or the 5x5 and everything, that's all for inclusion within differentiated assistance. So it would have repercussions. And
Ah,
I was going to mention that, like, this is the year, because everything that's happening right now um, for the administration of the science assessment will be a factor as far as participation goes. And so this is not the year where you want to, have schools like, well, science doesn't count. And so I'm not as worried, the 95% participation rate for all our academic indicators. There's always been that stipulation because it's in federal law, but there weren't any repercussions for science because it wasn't on the dashboard as an indicator that could be used for identification for ESSA or DA. Now there will be. And so the baseball card, and you'll have 2 years, which allows you to look at status and change, which will give you the full card, more than just the status baseball card. So that's my understanding. But yeah, there's some things they've got to work out. How would participation rate in high school be determined? I suspect
so
it'll be based on 12th grade, but that's something they have to work out too.
so there's a question in the chat box from Jennifer. She said, maybe I missed this. How will science indicators be taken into account along with ELA and math for overall academic color status of schools, considering the fact that only 3 grades take the CAS per year?
Yeah, I was telling Anthony before the meeting, so that is, so a school's entire science results would hinge on the performance of that one grade. And then it becomes an even bigger factor because participation rate is a big deal. And the way that the feds require the state to penalize schools who don't meet that participation rate is through the assignment of this lowest obtainable scale score. And it has an impact at a school level, but your denominator is based like in an elementary school or middle school on 3 grades. So a participation rate penalty when you're only having 1 grade incorporated in the measure is going to have a bigger impact. So that's one way. I also think it's a reflection. I think the grades that they chose were intentional, right? To capture, so you have the opportunity to maximize the amount of science that's being taught at all the grade levels, right? So having 5th and 8th grade, you'll get hopefully a pretty the best outcomes for a school because you've had 3 years at the middle school, for example, or 6 years, well, 7 years if you include TK in the elementary school. So hopefully that will be a good reflection on the school. The other factor, I guess, with high school is, it's always that timing, right? I've got twin daughters who are juniors right now, and they just got the announcement, their school administers ELA, math, and science all in 11th grade, right? And of course, it's competing for attention with AP exams and the SAT, school day SAT. So, it's a little bit worrisome. So some schools may wish to, reconsider, but you kind of have to get some data initially to make those determinations. As far as how they will incorporate in terms of colors, for now, and this is kind of unique for the district level or a charter school level, the dashboard currently looks at ELA math together. And so I suspect it'll be the same thing for DA, differentiated assistance. They'll look at ELA math and science together, and some combination of red and orange will be used to say that the academic indicator was a factor for identification for this student group. Schools, however, currently look at each academic indicator separately. So, for instance, one of the criteria for CSI low performing is you could have 5 indicators, the majority of which are red. So you could have red on ELA, a yellow on math, but a red on suspension, red on chronic absenteeism. And that would be enough to get you identified for CSI, let's say. That would probably be the case for schools as well. Like each indicator would operate somewhat separately and would be factored into the overall criteria for identification.
Evan, thanks for sharing that because and I also think that you're also supporting the fact that all of us at the county offices have been trying to get districts to do something with the science since its inception, and especially when we heard the placeholder for the science dashboard. So really trying to stress upon districts, now is the time to do something, especially with the three different grade levels. So with the elementary, I think it's going to be huge since it's taught at fifth grade, but it's essentially assessing students in terms of how much are they understanding from kinder through fifth grade. Same thing with the eighth grade test, sixth through eighth. But when you think about it in reality, it's a K-8 test, and then high school is essentially really a K-12 test.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I would say the overall, when just looking at the CAST scores on the public reporting site, that's been a bright spot, because we've seen consistent improvement in terms of this percentage of students meeting or exceeding standard. But this is where I think the dashboard is unique, and what I like about the dashboard and the utilization of as distance from standard as opposed to percentage meeting or exceeding standard. The distance from standard takes into account both your highest learners and your most struggling students, and you can have a lot of growth among your students who they may not meet standard, but they still may have seen a lot of growth. So the challenge is going to be like, whereas now we see it kind of, you can see an impact from one year to the next, because for ELA math, now you've got this, big gap, like those same students, to catch them up, you won't, be another year before their scale scores will be, it'll be 3 years before their scale scores would be a factor again. So there'll be this kind of blind spot. And so the use of probably your science IABs and whatnot will be a factor that I think schools would be smart to incorporate, so that they can be constantly kind of giving the students the opportunity to engage with those materials, and not just the testing, but the content, so.
So again, Evan, just to recap, year one, it'll be the baseball card version, which will have some kind of impact. Year two is really when the CDE powers that be are really going to try to figure out what that status change cut scores are going to be. And then in year three, that's when it's really going to hit the fan in terms of you need to, year three, it's going to be you are identified for differentiated assistance because of the science or as a result of the addition of the science. Would that be safe to say?
I think you're going to feel the impact sooner than that.
Oh,
So, I mean, here's the thing though. I mean, I don't want to make anybody panic. Everybody, in terms of the implementation and the engagement, if you're in this room, you probably have a, pretty good idea of what your school or your district has been doing, and you may be disappointed, but everybody's struggling. Nobody's figured it all out. And this has been the case before. If it's not, measured in a clear way, if there are repercussions, it's hard to get people to take it seriously. So the benefit is that the initial implications, because it's not an objective criteria, you meet this or you don't, it's a distribution. So everybody's in this boat, right? You just have to be on the upper end of that scale and probably stay out of trouble, right? So and eventually, they'll pick some cut scores, and then at some point, once everybody has really, oh, wow, this has got implications, and adjusted, then they adjust the cut scores, right? After a few years, if the distribution of schools has moved away, because they, sad to say, but the whole reason the dashboard exists is to identify schools for additional support, and that's the idea. And so they do want to have schools in red, right? And so schools or districts, but as things shift and schools start to take it more seriously and have a more, or just the opportunity to integrate NGSS in a more meaningful way, and they start to see school scores change, they may have to readjust or adjust the cut scores and the 5x5. But if you're on the more forward end of adopting the standards, implementing them, then I would think that you would be pretty well off.
all right, folks. So if you have questions, feel free to unmute and ask those questions, or if you're more comfortable putting them in the chat box. But this is an opportunity to ask questions, especially in terms of obstacles that you think you might be hitting, walls, whatever we're here to answer questions, or rather, I've got Evan here to answer those questions. Yeah, if you have questions after today, feel free to email Evan. He's put his email address in that chat box. I'll also make sure I put that out in the follow-up email to all of you as well.
I would love to turn the tables here, though, just in terms of what concerns you currently have, depending on your role, in terms of the implications of having science appear. It's great that it can be on the dashboard and that it now has the clout of ELA and math. But what concerns might you have about the dashboard? Because I won't say I can change anything, but I love to be able to give voice to these concerns when I do meet with the CDE. I'm part of the Regional Accountability Network, which is another one of the advisories to the CDE. So if you have anything that you say, well, this is really a concern, can it be considered when you're factoring in, how to represent the data on the dashboard? So Dolly's question, the October 15th date that I said is there's legislation, I think it was SB 114, but over the next 3 years, the date of the publication of the dashboard will be moving up to really make the dashboard publication timeline more meaningful. So you can see the dashboard and act on it earlier in the year instead of waiting till late December, right before everybody goes to break, and then having all the information come out and then spending. So it's to be more consistent, so you can start making planning and changes earlier.
So Evan, there are a couple of questions, but I'm going to give it up to Maggie first before I go to the ones that are in the chat box. So Maggie?
Hi, thanks, Anthony. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I don't know if this would be the place for it, but I know that in our district, speaking with administrators, they're not very clear as to how ELA and math scores correlate to science scores. I think we looked at CAST data this year, and there was a lot of conversation about how ELA and math aren't interdependent with one another in terms of scoring. Like a student can do really well in ELA and not so well in math and vice versa, but that's not true with science. And so my question is this an opportunity to help clarify that, or is there information or different components that are going to help clarify this to administrators to help teachers push along with science, especially at the K-5?
That's a good question. I don't know. I would, if I were back in my last district, I would be looking for these correlations and seeing, like, where can we leverage, because you have limited amount of time to support students, and where could we get the biggest bang for our buck to move, scores, to help improve scores in more than one place. I would think that there would be some data that could come out of the science IABs that might be helpful to that end. Let me take that up with my peers. That's a good topic of conversation for our DAN meeting, like how you might start to, because we've had people do some real deep dives into the data that comes out in conjunction in the CERS, the California Educator Reporting System. There's sub-tests, we've had for a couple of years now. You haven't had the domain scores for individual students, but that's helpful information. They do publish the writing responses to get that data, and people have been doing a deep dive into that and how maybe we put more effort on writing. Will that affect our overall scale score? Because it's just it's just one domain, but it could have an outsized impact. But it would be interesting to see if now, are you saying though is math tends to be what has a bigger impact, or ELA on students' science scores?
Well, in our case, we are struggling all across. So there's been a lot of conversation about how ELA can impact CAST scores and how math also impacts. So we're not saying one impacts CAST more than the other. I think what I'm trying to figure out is how do we acknowledge that it does have an impact on
So I think this is, Evan, if you don't mind, and feel free to pounce on me and like stop me. But since I'm on the curriculum instruction side, I definitely see the impact that the science will have or is having on the math and the ELA portion, especially in lieu of how the CAS test is designed in terms of students have to read the thing, but more importantly, they're still having to think about it computationally as well. So there's that aspect of that. The other piece that we have been, and when I say we, the state, in terms of the statewide NGSS collaborative, we've been trying to get districts to understand how, again, all the content areas are now aligned to each other in terms of NGSS supports what's going on in the Common Core math and the ELA, et cetera, et cetera. So I think as a result of now having this dashboard, I think it is now going to be even more prudent for us to be very explicit in terms of here's the impact that science is going to have on the ELA and the math in terms of how we now need to think about all of these content courses collectively together and not as independent entities, especially now that we can continue to use the visual performing arts standards, the history, social science standards, et cetera, et cetera. All of them, I think, is going to be really, really important in terms of justifying to districts and to teachers of how we need to provide this more well-rounded education. But again, that's just my thinking as far as the curriculum instructional side of things. Heavy to think about.
Yeah, I'm going to share screen because I see Jennifer's question. It wasn't Jennifer's, I'm sorry.
Feel free. I think you have.
That was Jennifer. So here's what Anthony was referring to. This is the dashboard, and you can see it's Baldwin Park. My friend's Baldwin Park. This is the LP, but this is what they call the baseball card. And the distinction here is, you only get a baseball card if you have the numbers of students. This is for all students, right? So, but even for all students, depending on the number of students, in a district or a school, usually you have, but in this case, the LP only serves English learners. So in some cases, you might not have a baseball card that has a color assigned to it. In this case, they are yellow, right? And you could see the number of EL students who are incorporated in that. And because it has colors, it means that they had both status and change. They had 2 years, well, in this case, 3 years. I shouldn't have started with the LP because it's really an outlier because it uses 3 years worth of data. Probably more consistently would be like the math. So based on 2 years worth of data, this is all students and then each individual student group. And the significance of having a baseball card is it means if a student group has a baseball card, that color means it makes the district eligible for identification for differentiated assistance. And for a school, it means they're eligible for identification for ATSI at least, right? So you have to, because you'll see data sometimes where, they have no performance color, but they have enough students to have a status. So if you have between 11 and 29 students, you'd have a status, but you wouldn't have a color. And that would mean there were no identification implications. It would just be because you'd have to have 30 students for your student group for it to be, and you'd have to have 30 students in both years, like on both the prior year and the current year to get a color. So sometimes you'll see, oh, we had 32 students. How come we didn't have a color this year? It's because the prior year you only had 28 for that student group. I think what Anthony might have been referring to, and I just picked this page because it does also have the college career indicator. That's that first year where you had status only. I think that based on the announcement, and what the work plan entails, my sense is that you'll have your full color. It won't just be status, because this college career indicator, this is the first year it came back, so it was implemented. They could only generate 1 year's worth of data because of the timing for the 2023 dashboard, but for the summative science assessment, they will have 2 years worth of data. They will likely, approve. I think I maybe mentioned, Anthony, that I would expect that the work will take place over the course of the summer. They'll run it past all their advisory groups. They'll look at the data. They'll share the data with the CPAG and the technical design group and these other groups. usually ETS will do mock-ups of what it would look like, and like, here's this distribution. What do you think? And they'll take feedback, and then they'll present that feedback to the state board probably around September, so that it would be included by the December, and they may have to meet more than once depending on how much information there is. But that's what happened this year with the LP. They finalized the LP 5x5 and established the cut scores for the change this year. So that all transpired, and they had to share with them all the data. That all transpired in one board meeting, and it was on the dashboard as a finalized metric by December. So that's a baseball card.
Thanks. Anybody else have questions? Again, if not, after you watch today, I'll make sure that you get Evan's email so that you can bombard him with your questions. And then we also have Stephen Bartlett, who's also with CIS in terms of the assessment piece. So he's there to really talk about the assessments, whereas I'm actually going to can work with you in terms of the formative assessments in classrooms. So he's all about just what it is, and questions about dashboards and other things of that nature, just like Evan is. I'm more about the curriculum in terms of formative assessments, summative assessments, and what that looks like in the classrooms. So if that helps you in terms of that distinction between what all of our different units can do. Maggie's got a question. Is it safe to say the CAST assumes students are at grade level in ELA and math?
That is a really good question. I don't know. And one of the considerations I thought of as we were talking here is, what are the, difficult challenges you have. Science is included. If I'm an English learner, if I've just arrived within the last year, I'm not expected to take the ELA assessment. I could, but I'm exempt, right? And the school is not held accountable for that student in that first year for ELA. That does not apply for math or science. This is an old law. And probably when we were administering the CST, it made sense because, sure, you could take, I don't know if it ever made sense for science because, how you were supposed to read through the academic language of any reasonably constructed science exam, I don't know. But so you're going to be having students, yes, I'm assuming is probably written close to grade level. There, of course, are going to be accommodations available. They're already there. And so that's another, I think, area that Stephen can provide a lot of support with regards to considerations for providing adequate accommodations and the universal tools and other things to make, give the most opportunity for your students to demonstrate what they've learned on the test. But, the test is going to be challenging for accessibility reasons and for language, reading ability, all those things. Yeah, there is guidance. I'll send the link. There's new guidance every year with regards to tools for assigning the universal tools. There's like there's 3 levels, and the ETS provides the guidance for everyone how to best apply those tools. And I'm assuming in terms of accommodations, the universal tools are available to anyone. Designated supports are available to students with the teacher's recommendation. So, if I say, oh, my students would benefit from this, that's all that is needed. There doesn't have to even be formal documentation around that. And then accommodations would require an IEP.
And then is there criteria students must meet?
Yeah, it's laid out. And most times there are going to be some, and it's been a while. It's not quite my area that it used to be, but sometimes you can assign an accommodation, but then the student's score will no longer be considered valid. So, and sometimes it's in the best interest of the student. It's the right decision to make, but because the accommodation may compromise the validity of the test, you can apply it, but the student's score won't be included. And typically, that's not going to harm you in any way. That score would not be included on the dashboard, but it would factor into your participation rate because that student would be considered having participated, and the score just wouldn't be used for the dashboard. So it shouldn't effectively be a problem if you were to apply the criteria that made their invalid. Yeah, get him on Steven's case. Steven knows his assessment stuff.
By the way, Evan, I don't know if you attend, but just to let everybody know, over the summer, I think it's the summer, we've got the California Assessment Conference, and I'm almost sure that there's going to be a lot of science dashboard pieces that are going to be included in that conference. And fortunately, for all of us here, if you are interested, the California Assessment Conference will be in Riverside, so it's local. We won't be going up north for that conference. So once that has been released, I'll make sure that all of you get notice of that so that you're aware of that. But again, this is probably a good piece for Stephen to barge in on that, especially in light of the brand new interim assessments for science as well. So I'm almost sure that's also going to be tied to how we may be seeing the development of that dashboard, or at least the impacts of that dashboard with those interim assessments as well.
And I'll report back. I'll confirm with you with regards to what we expect to see on this dashboard. But I would go forward with the assumption it's going to be fully operational by December with all the implications. How it's incorporated, that's going to be remain to be seen in terms of eligibility and whatnot. But everybody should take it very seriously, because I do believe there will be implications this first year. It's not just for looks.
I'm going to hold you to that promise. So we'll be seeing Evan again here on these calls in the next few months. Thanks, Evan, for
Thank
your
you.
joining us. All right, folks. So we're going to continue going on with the rest of the meeting in terms of announcements. So the announcements that we've got, of course, again, as you know, the STEM science unit is actually working with computer science. And just to let you know, the STEM science unit will be going through an evolution. So I am actually going to be helping the ITO, Instructional Technology Outreach Group, transition into working on not just the digital learning platform, but also computer science. So at some point, I'll be actually transitioning out of computer science, but in the meantime, I'm still going to be here to support. So a computer science opportunity. We've still got season of CS coming up. In fact, next month, we've got March 7th and March 28th. So again, this is a continuing continuing monthly jump in the CS opportunities for all of you, where you can receive that $125 stipend as well. So again, you can, when you have the slide deck, you can go on into the slide. You can also look into the resource folder and find the PDF for this. But registration is open right now. It is free again. And upon completion of both meetings, as well as the asynchronous work, when at the end of the quarter, then you'll receive your $125 stipend. So again, this is the next one going into March, and then we'll still have an April session as well as a May session. So you still have 2 more sessions there. We also have, if you haven't started your conversations about computer science in your school or district, we do have the CS Equity Guide that you can share with your administrators, but this is also downloadable to you. But if you want the hard copies, just send me an email, tell me how many you want, and we'll go ahead and send that out to you. But this has case studies and more. So again, it is free, downloadable. There is a workshop that is available for you as well. So if you want an opportunity to that, I will go ahead, send me an email, and then I'll see what I can do in terms of at least getting you access to that workshop, or I might be able to provide that for you as well. So we are also very, very excited again that the Science Scaffold Toolkit workshop that we offered back in January and December, we were at full capacity. As a result, we are offering one more time this workshop taking place April 3rd, 2024. So again, there is plenty of room right now, but it is filling up quickly. So this is another opportunity for you. But if you need access to it, we have access to it for you right now. So when you go into the slide deck, I think when you click on this image, it'll take you straight over to the PDF version. So that is going to be available for you electronically. other announcements and updates. So again, next week, hopefully I'll have the brand new STEM science notes for March ready for you. But if you are know anybody, if you yourself have been doing some stuff around, oh, I'm sorry, this is the wrong slide. But CASE conference is
I
actually
know.
taking.
When I like I'm on my phone, I'm in the living room at work, but when I start
Oops. Hey, hi. If you wouldn't mind muting yourself, but I put the wrong slide in here. But the case conference is taking proposals now. March 15th is the deadline for that. And then we've got for those of you as part of the LA County Science Leaders, the next meeting is taking place April 22nd. And then for those of you on the webinars, it's April 17th. So no meeting next month because I am fully booked up next month. Not to mention it's spring breaks going on, lots of different competitions and other things of that nature. So, but I hope that this provides you with a lot of information that you need. And again, feel free to just contact us at any time should you have any other needs. If you want a topic that you need for us to talk about as well, just send me an email about that as well. All right. But again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you, Evan, for joining us and providing all of that wonderful information. And again, we will contact you, especially and invite you back when you have more information about the dashboard.
Thanks, Anthony.
No problem. So much fun. Always love working with you.